Rhea is, along with Kronos, the most important first-generation Titan. She is the mother of some of the most important figures in the entirety of Greek mythology. Her children would go on to be rulers of the universe, and the objects of worship for millions of people throughout time. But what did she actually do? Why was she so important? And what happened to her after the overthrow of Kronos? Let's talk about it. Before we get any further into today's episode, I just want to quickly ask you to subscribe and like if you enjoy my content. It really helps the channel out and it motivates me to make more content. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Rhea is the daughter of Gaia and Kronos. She, along with most of her siblings, took no part in the overthrow of Kronos. In fact, she seems to have not done much of anything during this time, as the first time Rhea is featured prominently in any writings is when she is married to Kronos, shortly after his actions against Kronos. By this point, Rhea is already being referred to as a mother goddess, and the goddess of female fertility, motherhood, and generation. This makes sense when you consider just what her children would come to be. She has to be the mother goddess, as her children are the most important gods and goddesses in the entire mythology. It was likely these domains, as well as her own motherly instincts, that drove Rhea to eventually go against her husband and save her youngest son, Zeus. Remember that at this point, Kronos was so paranoid about being overthrown that he was literally swallowing his own children so as to ensure that no one could fulfill the warning that Kronos and Gaia had given him. Rhea, either on her own or with the help of Gaia, rushed Zeus away to the island of Crete shortly after his birth. Rhea then gave her husband a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. It really says a lot about Kronos' state of mind that he could not see through this deception. I mean, think about it. Kronos was the most powerful being in the universe. He was capable of turning himself into anything he wished, he could control the flow of time, and he had already devoured 5 other of his children. It seems odd then that he couldn't tell the difference between a stone and a child. But I think this is really just another way of expressing just how horrible and paranoid his state of mind had become. He was so concerned with ensuring that the words of his father did not come to pass that he didn't even stop to think when offered the stone. Anyway, we will cover the childhood of Zeus in his own episode, but Rhea was mostly uninvolved, as if she had actually spent any time with Zeus, Kronos would have almost certainly realized that something was going on. And if Kronos had discovered Zeus as an infant, then he almost certainly would have either eaten or killed Zeus, and Rhea would have likely been imprisoned or killed as well. Of course, Zeus does eventually grow up and inherit his massive amount of power. Following his scheme to have Kronos vomit up his siblings, Zeus declares war on the Titans. At this point, we can probably safely assume that Kronos and the other Titans knew that Rhea had deceived them all, and so it makes sense that Rhea did not support the Titans. However, it seems as though Rhea did not actively support her son either. So what gives? Why did she not support the son that she had worked so hard to ensure he was not found? Well, first of all, Rhea was not a fighter. We are told that she was skilled in wrestling, but that wouldn't have been all that useful in the high-power fights that the Olympians and the Titans eventually had. Plus, I imagine that Rhea was very conflicted. Yes, Zeus was her son and the other Olympians were her children, but it's obvious that she was in love with, or at least loyal to Kronos throughout most of the Titans' history. It wasn't an accident that the first 5 of her children were devoured by Kronos. We are told that each time this happened, a great grief overtook Rhea, and that this eventually built into her rebellion. But the fact remains that she allowed Kronos to swallow her earlier children. Could she have done something about it? Well, I mean, maybe not. After all, Kronos was the most powerful person in the universe. But still, it's obvious that Rhea felt some sort of loyalty to her husband, as she didn't really fight back at all. Now, with those two sides fighting, Rhea must have felt caught in the middle. Because of this, she stays neutral, or at least doesn't participate in the fighting itself. Because of her neutrality and the simple fact she was the mother of the 6 new rulers of the universe, Rhea is not imprisoned alongside her husband and brothers following the Olympians' victory. Instead, she is essentially allowed to retire. She moves to Crete, specifically Mount Ida, the same place Zeus was raised, and begins to live a life of mostly seclusion. So then what did Rhea do during the rule of Zeus and the Olympians? Well, we have a few short mentions of her and her actions, so let's run through them. The first time Rhea is mentioned following Zeus's victory is at the birth of Apollo. She was said to be present at the birth, as were most of the other goddesses, save for Hera and Thea, the goddess of childbirth. It's said that in the absence of Elethea, Rhea was able to provide at least some comfort to Leto as she gave birth. Following this, the next mention of Rhea is in the myth of Dionysus, the god of winemaking, orchards, fruit, vegetation, fertility, festivity, insanity, ritual madness, religious ecstasy, and theater. Yeah, he sounds like a lot of fun. It was said that after the death of Dionysus' mortal mother, Selene, he was raised by Rhea. Of course, this is dependent on who exactly you choose to believe regarding the origins of Dionysus. I mean, really, there are so many origin myths of Dionysus that he could be anything from a god from another mythology to the son of two mortals. We will discuss this more in his own episode, but it's genuinely confusing to try to wrap your head around. During this time, it was Rhea who eventually cured Dionysus from the madness that Hera had inflicted upon him by giving him the amethyst. This amethyst was even said to prevent drunkenness, which was probably useful for the god of wine. Following this, Rhea really only receives a few more mentions in Greek mythology, most of which involve her cursing someone who had managed to offend her or the other gods. For instance, she turns Melanon and Atlantia into lions after they have intercourse within her temple. She turns a mortal man named Sangas into a river after he offended her in some way, and she turns a man named Pyrrhus into a stone after he attempted to rape her. Rhea was not worshipped as an individual deity by the time of classical Greece. We do have some records of her being worshipped on the Isle of Crete before this. It was said that her cults on Crete involved rhythmic dance and chants along with impersonations of her attendants, the Curetes and the Dactyles. The Curetes were 9-armed men who worshipped Rhea with great dances, while the Dactyles were spirit-like men who were skilled smiths and healers. The two formed a sort of retinue that Rhea assigned to various tasks throughout the mythology, including the guarding of Zeus on Crete. Instead of being worshipped in her own capacity in classical Greece, Rhea is worshipped as the mother of the gods. Several temples across Greece were dedicated to her under that name. These included temples in Corinth, Athens, Megalopolis, Olympia, and Sparta. There also seems to be a bit of a tradition of including a statue of Rhea in many of the temples of her children. However, it was Crete where most of her worship was centered. Here, there was apparently a house of Rhea that had been consecrated in ancient times, but stayed intact and undisturbed all the way to the classical period. There was also a cave somewhere on Mount Ida that was considered to be the birthplace of Zeus. It was so sacred that no man nor god was allowed near it, and it was said that the nurses of Zeus had been turned into bees and occupied and protected the cave. Rhea was the Great Mother. She was the reason that the Olympians even had a chance to fight against their father and attempt to take control of the universe. Without her actions to save Zeus, Kronos would have continued his iron-fisted rule, while the Olympians would have wasted away in his stomach. It makes sense then that Rhea was revered in that capacity. Her children would go on to be rulers of the universe and the main figures of Greek mythology, and that alone is enough of a reason to call Rhea important. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. I'm sorry for this episode being a little short, but we don't have a ton of information on Rhea. However, I do think that her role as the Great Mother and Mother of the Gods is so important that she deserved her own episode. If you have any comments or questions on the video, or believe I've made a mistake, please comment down below, and please like and subscribe if you enjoyed. It really helps the channel out. Peace.